Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our roundtable on challenges to democracy, and also a warm welcome to our online audience that are following through the live stream. If people have comments, they can add it to the chat, and then we will try to ask those questions to the panelists. I had a look at the program. Some of you have had a busy 2 days having numerous interesting workshops and paper presentations. And the organizers, which are the Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies and the Center for European Research in Maastricht, want to end these intensive 2 days of academic discussions by including stakeholders and a broad audience to discuss how research and practitioners can reinforce each other and what their take is on these challenges. So without further ado, you can hear my voices going, but it's good that we have 3 panelists who will do most of the talking. It is my privilege today to welcome some very interesting and distinguished guests to this roundtable. First, in the middle, we have Mara Almeida from the European Commission's Joint Research Center. Dr. Almeida holds a PhD in biology and medicine from Cambridge University. The Joint Research Center provides independent, evidence-based knowledge and science supporting EU policies to positively impact society. The JRC organizes its activities into 25 scientific portfolios designed to support the Commission's policy goals, one of which is democracy and public governance. And Mara, if I understood correctly, you work on the future of democracy, which I think is a very timely and appropriate subject for this roundtable. The aim of that portfolio is to inform policies to rebuild trust in democracy, and they want to better understand how to enhance resilience of public governance systems at EU level, in member states, and beyond. And this includes the design and testing of participatory, transdisciplinary, and place-based approaches to more closely align with the realities for citizens. And then we have here on the left, Giulia Sandri from the European Citizen Action Service, ECAS. Dr. Sandri is ECAS's Research and Development Manager, and she's also an associated researcher at the ULB Centre d'études de la vie politique, where she also obtained her PhD in political science. ECAS is an international Brussels-based non-profit organization with a mission to empower citizens in order to create a more inclusive and stronger European Union by promoting and defending citizens' rights and developing and supporting mechanisms to increase citizens and citizen organizations' democratic participation in and engagement with the EU. And then finally, on our right, we have Yves de Jager. He is the executive director at FIDE, the Federation for Innovation in Democracy Europe, because they also have a North American branch, I found out. Dr. de Jager holds a PhD in political sciences from KU Leuven. FIDE believes that politics should be brought closer to citizens by enabling active, inclusive engagement in public decisions through deliberative democratic methods. And their approach emphasizes professional facilitation, diverse participation via democratic lotteries, and informed deliberative processes to create better policy outcomes. I think that's an okay summary of what FIDE does. Okay, now having said all that, I think it's time that we let our guests speak about their experiences. We have prepared some general topics, but of course we're going to open up the discussion to the room. So if you want to intervene, have a question, the idea of a roundtable is that we don't have just somebody talks, somebody asks a question. So raise your hand. We have a second microphone because we are live streaming. The audio should happen through our various microphones, and somebody will hand it to you. I would like to start with Mara. The first topic that we wanted to raise is how findings from political science or social sciences in general, like research on effective polarization, democratic backsliding, citizens' trust, how that resonates with challenges you observe in your daily work at the JRC.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. So the JRC works very closely with researchers, so including researchers, political scientists. So we try to work as close as possible with researchers at the international level, not only from the member states. So at the moment we have a project in the JRC which is about the future of democracy, which we are working very closely with political scientists, but also with social scientists, sociologists, so philosophers, to help us basically answering the question that we asked them what they thought was the challenges for the future of democracy. So some of these points like citizens' trust very much came out, in the sense that if the issue is not very much the lack of trust of citizens towards democracy and also democratic institutions. So that's one of the points that's very much been in discussion along the project that we are doing, and which started in December 2023. And in that project, the first phase of the project, we asked this group of international experts what they thought, coming from their disciplines, they thought were the future challenges to democracy. And of course, at the core is really the trust that citizens have in democracy as a regime, as a governance system. Effective polarization, of course, also came along, in terms of the sense that one of the challenges that was identified was very much this erosion of democratic norms, where people are more and more polarized. And because of that, many of the democratic norms that we are seeing that before was, taken for granted, are very much being eroded. We see both at the citizens level, but also at the political level. So that's kind of a little bit of a summary of some of the discussions that we been having with researchers about these issues. But I think one of the main challenges that came out from this project was really the question is if democracy is not suitable, or citizens start thinking that democracy is not the system that's really answering their needs and their expectations. And of course, then we are in big trouble if people start thinking that, there is other regimes or the systems that they may think will be better for them than democracy. So that's very much, I think, at this stage, we are very much, the JRC has a big focus on that, also considering that it will come very soon from the Commission, the European Democracy Shield, which will touch upon many of the questions, and for which I think the research will be very important.
Okay. I would go to Julia first. Is that something that resonates?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that one of the aspects of, so I'm here as a practitioner, as you were saying, one of the aspects of research results that echoes in the work, helped the work of NGOs working with democracy is, for example, that research on affective polarization and related issues help explaining why our outreach programs, for example, for training journalists or activists in Central and Eastern Europe on debunking disinformation, for example, or involving local NGOs in EU policymaking, sometimes doesn't work because we often try to focus on fact. And that, so helping debunking, helping engagement based on rational explanation of what's going on, and research on polarization, for example, explain that people react emotionally and reject the sources that they see as outgroup. And for example, this is helping for understanding how to, adapt our action-oriented program in order to make them more effective with really the participants. So there are some recent research outcomes, especially in democratic backsliding, disinformation, different aspects of polarization that actually give insights on how to adapt specific programs in order to train or involve local NGOs or citizens in decision making, and that's very useful for us as a practitioner. So, yeah, of course, from the point of view of a practitioner, I think that the main ask for researchers right now will be to really try to study, as you were saying before when we were chatting, not just fundamental issues about backsliding and disinformation and polarization, but also try to study interventions, to test intervention, which some research already do, but really to focus on perceived procedural fairness and visible feedback loops. Because what we also see in our work is that citizens are asking when they are involved in European consultations, deliberative panels, any kind of participatory democratic innovation, what is perceived as missing is really the feedback loop. So they participate, they give their time, they do things, but it's not always easy to see how then this is guaranteed uptake in the policy process. And that's the work of NGOs to do, but from research, if some alternative tools for starting this kind of feedback loop can be developed, maybe in experiments or some kind of research control settings, will be useful to then fine-tune our actions.
Okay, thank you. Yves.
Thank you, Tom. So, I mean, not to repeat these things, I think at our organization, we are strongly interlinked with research. I mean, deliberative democracy as a field was actually very much launched by academics trialing things that they actually first theoretically positioned, people like David Farrell, Ken Carthy, etc., in North America. So basically there is such a strong link in our field with academics trialing actually things they position. So on the findings of political science, I would say from my perspective, really being, I would say, work on the ground sometimes in very minimal conditions. I have to tell you very often the budget for a deliberative project is a few 10,000 euros, right? So the fancy things get lost very often. It's really very down to earth. Is that, of course, citizen trust is very much something that comes back if we talk to policymakers starting this. This is like the number one thing they ask. Will this help us restore trust? Very often, if you push a bit, right? Those of you who've read your Pippa Norris and etc., the question is, some of them want trust in them, like, and we're like, yeah, we love the systemic trust, but it might that they might not like you anymore in the next election, right? Yeah, but I mean, we do advocacy. We have to convince, I have to talk to policymakers and tell them, why are you doing this? So for my advocacy, a lot of the research is very non-complex. I need straightforward, I was talking to Ruud about this. We have done some very nice papers together with very complex interaction effects on multi-level, etc. That type of thing is in my new job. I'm a recovering academic. You have to kind of forget a bit. You really have to be if you do advocacy, you have to be very straightforward. Even talking to people at the commission level, or they will go like, yeah, but does this help? Does A do B? And then you can't, come with 17 footnotes. On the other hand, one of the three main positions in my staff is we have a research manager. And part of, for us, what is a job that we very often need to do is, research always is looking for a frontier, yes? But we need to summarize across different experiences, right? So I know there's somebody in this room who delved very deeply in the Oost-Belgian first on Kinderbetreuung, if I'm not wrong. That's an amazing report for us, but if I'm talking we need to summarize what are the findings across tens of these, but not very complex, what are average response rates to letters? Who responds to a letter if we send it out? And some of that research, to be honest, we kind of need to redo ourselves because it's too basic for you guys, which is okay. But just if you send out letters and you change the logo, or for example, the Sortition Foundation, who does a lot of this work, experiments with, if you print on a letter, you will get paid for this or not. Does it change? So there's a lot of very, very basic frequency table, crosstabs type of work. And so one of the central things I think for me is, as researchers, you should not forget to sometimes always have that little thing. I'll give you an example. I reached out over LinkedIn 2 weeks ago to somebody who presented I have my PhD, and I was like, oh, interesting topic. So I mailed could you send me the summary? And actually I had to then ask, do you just have frequency on how many people were for, let's say, how many people supported citizen participation? It was immediately, you know, typologies and very well done. But for me, it's like, how many people say yes to, I support deliberative democracy? Or, and so you have that data, you know, every, that type of, I must say, and also this I said to, so I'm repeating myself a bit here, but it's, for some NGOs who work in more niche topics, some really deep crunching research might actually be interesting, right? So I talk as an umbrella organization. So for us, it's really the, and I think ECAS is a bit in a similar situation. We work across. So I'm only talking from my perspective. There are really smaller organizations working on very specific youth, you know, I think the GRC is piloting a youth assembly on pollinators. Of course, they're, yes, my research assistant is on your advisory board, so that's why I know. But that is very much, you know, there you need research on young people's participation in, etc., multilingual settings. So, but for us, on some of this, one of my messages would be just don't forget sometimes to just repeat, even if it's in your reports or some of your main findings, because that's the thing we are very often looking for as a kind of starter and a bit of a challenge throwing something into the group.
Yeah. If you already hinted at some forms that work better according to you, no, I have a microphone, so I'm fine here. Thanks. You hinted at some forms of communication, broader communication, targeted communication to certain audiences that, according to you, are necessary. Mara, for the JRC, what are the things that you think the forms that our reports take, the kinds of way in which we present our research or want to communicate our findings? What are the forms that you have found most helpful in your organization?
Not long reports, but I think everyone knows that. Even if it's painful, because of course in a previous life I was also a researcher, and for me, I think science or research, it's especially in the times we are living more than ever, is very important. And of course, asking a researcher to compile something in a very, in a small space is complicated because things are never black and white. There is many other issues that need to be discussed. But just by saying that, at the same time, the speed in the policy world is different, and people don't have time to read an 80-page report. Even not even 50 a lot of the times. So the size of what you are presenting to the policymaker will make a difference. A lot of the times the report will not be read. People will not read the full report. We know that basically there will be people that will read just the executive summary and then the policy recommendations at the end. And then maybe the people in the cabinet will read the whole report because they need to have a good idea of the topic. So if you go for the report, yes, I would recommend to be short. But then, of course, you have other formats like policy briefings, which can be 4 pages, which when I was working in the UK Parliament, the Office of Science and Technology to inform the parliamentary debate in the UK, that was basically the maximum number for a policy brief was 4 pages. And the joke was that was how much MP could take at breakfast. It was 4 pages, not more than that. But it was really, really hard to produce that 4 pages because basically it meant that you were trying to be consistent, you were trying to be factual, but in a very short space. So it was a difficult challenge, which I think it's interesting also to propose yourself to have that challenge. Are you able to say the key message in 4 pages? So that's a format which I think is quite popular at the policy level. But then you have variations. You also have maybe 10 pages or of course, they love the 2 pages briefs. But of course, then, is also how you present the data, graphs, colors, image, and then the language. If you use a lot of jargon, if the language is not kind of more simple, in a sense that this is one of the things, because of course I work very closely in the work that I do with researchers, is like the habit of having very long sentence. It just doesn't work. So it's little things that, I think people can pick up, but there is a difference between, of course, I think everyone knows that about the world in research and the world of policy. They work at different speeds. Their aims are different, or their objectives is different. But I think more and more we need evidence to be very present in policy discussions, considering what we are seeing many of the discussions in terms of climate change, vaccines. So I think we are living in a times where evidence is more than ever needed. So I think it's really how clever we are in presenting that research and that evidence.
I've heard many things, Julia. Also, something that puzzles me in this is, where does the researcher fit in the sense that this is what policy needs? But do you see this as a role, this translational role, the intermediary role of the NGO? Or is this something that researchers should be doing? Because Eve has a research manager to do that for him. But the real question here, and for the people maybe around the table, is this something they should take away in how they should produce things? Or is this about the collaboration with NGOs? And how do you see your role in that?
Well, these are 2 different questions. First of all, the role of researchers in policymaking, that's one of the main things I always say when I talk with former colleagues, or as Yves was saying, I'm a recovering academic too. So the point is, you need to understand the policy cycle. So whatever is the topic of your research, you need to understand where we are, where the country you're working in is at elaborating a new policy or evaluating our previous policies on that topic, and you need to intervene at the beginning of the policy cycle, or even before the next policy cycle is launched. And to do that, researchers have to build strong networks with policymakers. There are many ways to do that. It can be individually, or it can be through grassroots organizations, collaborations, or think tanks collaboration, and so on. So either individually or through intermediate organizations, researchers need to build direct contact with policymakers. There are some more institutional ones, like through the GRC, or there are similar centers like the GRC also at national level. Not in all the countries, but in many of them. I know in France, for example, there's some kind of interinstitutional committee on evidence-based policymaking, for example. I think there's a similar thing also in Belgium. I don't remember the acronym, but there's something like that in Belgium too. So there are intermediate organizations, either NGOs or institutional ones, that provide this link. But the point is to understand the policy cycle, and for political scientists that should not be a problem, and to closely monitor the evolution of policies in the field you're working on, so that you can provide your expertise at the right moment. Because you can then re-intervene later when maybe the bill is tabled in the parliament and the discussion is going on. But the point, if you really want to have an influence, is to work with before the preparation of the new policy, let's say. This can be done individually, it can be done through institutional settings that are there exactly for that, or through NGOs, because we mix the research and the advocacy in what we do. So it depends also on the field. If you work more in environmental sciences, maybe NGOs are even broader in the capacity for advocacy. It depends on the field. But really the point is understanding the policy cycle and when to intervene.
Yeah, I concur, and maybe this is, I know you all have spare time, loads of spare time between, you know, the academic ladder you're climbing and the publication output you need to do. But for example, the the president of our board is actually a professor at one of the Belgian universities. We have several academics, and I think if you really have some spare time, if you're into elections, I don't know what the equivalent of the British Reform Society, Electoral Reform Society is or something, but I would say actually become engaged even as a board member, where you have to do 2 meetings a year or something, but it'll give you a better feeling of sometimes the very banal, down-to-earth work we're doing. At this moment, for example, it's the multi-annual financial framework is, you know, policy cycle, so that was my meeting this morning. I don't know how much wiggle room there is still. I'm willing to have a coffee on the defense of democracy was the previous. It's now the Democratic Shield. It changed names. So my work has really changed from a sort of, you know, you work on democratic trust and etc. Like effectively, especially at the European level, focusing on and what is the nail you have to hammer at the right moment. And effectively, this means we have to sense where, at this moment, for example, the priority in a commission is, what, you know, so it's really, and that sense, what you could bring from, probably it's somewhere in your toolkit, is best done to having at least some connection to NGOs. Because very often you have it somewhere, you have more, and this is where I've when I was listening to you, I wrote focus. What is also a bit is, you do loads of research that is really interesting to you, but there is also for us sometimes what is the priority here? What is the nail? Even amongst NGOs, this morning my meeting was amongst NGOs on the multi-annual financial framework. Really, we're live streaming, but I guess it's not. But we actually, between us, also have to go a bit like, okay, we can't push on 17 nails at the same time. Which ones are we going to push forward here? Will we push for more money in social and cohesion funds on participation, or more on regional, etc.? And then, you know, so it's really a very, very down-to-earth job we're doing, and it's very hard to translate if you're not somewhat in tap by just being, and that there is a bit of a lost in translation sometimes if you're not in that field. But I mean, this is normal. We're in very different, we have also, I mean, the incentives, I've been an academic, are completely different on one side than on the other side. So it is also a hard translation to make. So there's no fall or you would need to do better, but sorry, I was distracted.
Does anybody from the audience wants to ask questions before I continue? Just checking, because maybe you're afraid of intervening.
Thank you. I think Yves touched on a very interesting topic, and it's the incentives, right? In the sense that now, for example, in my university is changing. They really want us to have more social impact. They want to install a policy powerhouse. But it's more than 10 years that I do this job. And so far, I had no incentive to reach out to NGOs. So I think I also want to bridge a bit with the question that was just asked, right? Because for me, what it's unclear is that, for example, you said we have a research director. So in my mind, immediately, this person translated in somebody who looks at the literature and comes to you with summaries, for example, right? I have no idea what this person does. The way in which you look at the literature, which kind of literature, is there somebody that simplified and takes for you? I think what I'm trying to say is that there are two things. And one is that it seems that we are not very well connected in the sense that we have our word and our incentives. And every now and then these two words collide, try to collaborate, but at the university level, collaboration with an NGO is never going to be valued as a very good publication, right? So it's true that there is a problem of incentive, depending on the publication and the collaboration. And the other problem is that you three have a PhD. You have a super clear idea of what is academia, how it works. If you want to reach for somebody, you have your networks. To be honest, I have no idea about to reach for an NGO, what they're doing, how they're working. So I think on your side, there is a lot of knowledge on how the university works. And from our side, okay, I don't want to look at, maybe my colleagues know, but I have to be honest, for me, it's a bit of a black box. They exist, they do something, these NGOs. What do they do? How do I reach out? Is it interesting for them that I reach out? It's right, I can be in a board, but is it really something useful? For me, it's really something that, yeah, it's a bit obscure.
So, I mean, the incentive structure is changing a little bit. You see it in Horizon projects, but I have my thoughts about some of that too. But for example, in recent Horizon projects, if you wanted to have the project, you need some social thing, which means, and I know it's Horizon end moment because I've been invited to several end moments where they then need civil society to show up. I see you laughing, but for example, we accepted no invitation 3 years ago to step into a Horizon project. I think the incentives are there, but it's still work also for the Commission. I'm sorry, I'm looking at you. You work at the GRC, but it's to simplify. Is to simplify the Commission. Yeah. It's the reporting and which is great for you guys, but for us, I mean, the trade-off in how much time goes into the format of such a research project and the time we just have is just, I mean, it's an imbalance. And second of all, again, I'm speaking for myself, from some niche organizations, this is great, but a lot of the incentives in these Horizon projects, the power imbalance is that it's in the researcher's hand. They need an NGO. They need an NGO as something part of the project, but we just need core funding to do basic citizen assemblies at the local level, you know, right? And that's basically what I would want, is structural funding. But you need to do something that is beyond what's already done, so it's how do young people in intersectional, and which is great, but sometimes for me that's like, yeah, sorry, I could go into that whole project. And so, for example, there was a lot of funding going into deliberative democracy in the last Horizon, and some of these are, and unfortunately Konstantin is not here from IFOC because they've done a few of those, but some of those were done in places where local authorities were not demanding, and so you had citizens sitting doing a climate assembly and then making a report, but because that university couldn't convince the mayor of that town or whatever to want this assembly, it became a research project, which is great, but for us that's citizen assemblies have been done, they work, we just need to do them where there is a mayor who wants them, etc. So there is still and I'm just saying, it's just a search now at the moment to find this. So I think this first iteration has been a bit of where there is the demand, and the FEO is also doing this more and more, FNRS, you know, show what it is doing. And I think we need a better translation between some of the very pedestrian demands that we might have. A lot of us just, like people working here in Brussels on poverty and whatever, it's just to feed, shelter, you know. How can we find something that's interesting for you? And so that's where I think this conversation needs to be more intense. Whether this is you coming more to our boards or we sitting down a bit more together. But there is very limited money for both of us. And I think the VUB just lost 10 million, I think, in the last funding round. Yesterday or the day before yesterday. Yes, I see somebody nodding. So we're both in a shrinking space. So we need, my thing is, we need to get more bang for our buck if we talk to each other. If you have to find an NGO, if you start searching on the moment you're writing your Horizon project, Tom, I'm talking too long, so no, I always joke that I'm a recovering academic. That means I talk in 2-hour blocks. And for us, it's knowing where something that we do can provide you an edge, but still fits in what we do. And there is no fault here, but I feel this is still something where we're all looking. And some of the people jumping into this is a sort of semi-commercial field of people who provide apps to do participation in this and that, they will provide this. They will say, oh, we can run this for you. But whether this has societal impact really pushes it forward from our perspective is not always 100. So we need to have more of these. And especially, I think, before there's new funding rounds, it would be good to organize. I mean, I'm improvising here on the spot, but that would be a good moment to have a bit of almost a market where, I don't know, I'm not finding a solution to it.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, but what you were saying made me think about one important point that can help building these bridges and networks that are useful for you, but also for us, let's say, as practitioners. It might be different type of research, but research is done also outside academia. And that is important. In the sense, not only institutions, but also NGOs, think tanks, especially those that are based in Brussels, just have a look at what's happening outside, go to workshop, go to seminars, presentations, whatever. I mean, I'm in the field of AI and democracy, technology and democracy, and the most advanced research I listened to recently is not done by university. Also by university, but not only. And if you go out and see what's happening outside university, organized by other institutions, I'm not saying just NGOs, but in general, think tanks, private research institute, whatever. In Brussels, there's everything. I mean, you're very busy, everybody's very busy, but if you have half a day a month or every 2 months just to go to Brussels, have a look at the calendars of different organizations and choose one workshop in your field, you will see that what is presented is often of a very good quality, and often it's action-oriented research that maybe for you is not interesting, but will link you or provide a link to those organizations that are actually using the implication and the actual societal use of the research that's been presented. So the point is, well, like in everything in life, you need to go out and meet people to do stuff, basically. So that's how it works. Sorry, I know with teaching and publication and committee meeting and doing all the admin that university lecturers and professors are doing right now, you don't have time. But if impact and working with civil society organization, institution, and doing evidence-informed policy making is what you want to do in the future, then you really need to go out of the buildings of the university and meet people outside.
Yeah, we talked about the ecosystem and the different ecosystems, the incentives, right? Maybe we'll try to make a segue into content. Maybe you talked about like you want money for basic applications, then researchers want to do complicated frontier things. Is there sometimes a mismatch in the kind of research and the topics that researchers are investigating? And if so, what are, like, according to you, the most pressing things that are not being dealt with at the moment? It's a big question. Sorry. Ruud. Maybe for the, I don't know, for our online audience, maybe, and also for people here, I don't know, who knows each other, maybe you can state your name and your affiliation.
Rita Sonneville, KU Leuven. Sort of a connected question, thing that I'm wondering, given that you want sort of simple things and things about what works, simple not in a bad way, sort of straightforward, what works, we want to know what is effective to have an impact. As academics, sort of one of the concerns is that we have in terms of research is the bias into what gets published and that file drawer problem. I wonder how big of a thing that is for you. I mean, are you interested in knowing what doesn't work as well? So how much of sort of the summaries that you want to see should be all these things have zero impact, and there's this one tiny little thing that maybe under a bunch of conditions could be helpful, but I wouldn't invest a lot of money in it.
Yeah. I see nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, what's not working is also very useful in the sense that when we have to organize outreach or grassroots, on-the-ground activities for involving citizens or whatever we want to do, of course, knowing what's not working is useful for us. But the point is really the communication channel. So how do we know that something's not working? So the point is finding a way to meet each other and to know that your research exists so I can use it. And I'm not saying that researchers need to come to NGOs, but we need to find a way to communicate better so we can actually know what's not working, what this is. So.
It's very important, again, because the limited amount of resources that are out there. And sometimes it's a bit unfortunate that things are online, so you can't really talk out of the box, but I'll be vague enough so you know what I mean. I was an expert on something a federal government did for input on the Constitution, and I wrote a document that was internal, not to be published, but kind of halfway through the thing. This is what I think you will run into, because knowing from participation research, you know, and some of this is simple Almen and Verba stuff, really. You still have to sometimes say, like, look, no, the guy who drives the tram of the STIB will at 11 o'clock not open his laptop if he has one to, so these are the publics you will miss, right? So what not work, but this is a very simple, I see you nodding, but there are much more complex on that. And so we sometimes see the same mistake being made over by policymakers who need to be quick, because you cannot forget these people are under immense pressure to deliver. They have also, you know, and so they're like, oh, let's try this, and you'll be like, gee, we know since 1964, whatever, that this will not get this public, and so yeah, what doesn't work is really crucial, because there is so little money. This is what role do NGOs and other societal actors play? My example, the metaphor that works for me is we have little buckets and the opposition comes with a flamethrower. So the Heritage Foundation, to be really blunt, goes to GlobeSec in Central and Eastern Europe and just hands out their cards, right? So American players come to and just go like, we can help you guys, you want help with your campaign. Of course, they focus on specific political actors they want to help and support. And so we then have to write a little project for disinformation. So we need to make sure that if we get 60,000 euros, that, you know, that we're not missing something. So yeah, if you have any information you have on, this thing seems obvious, but it doesn't work at all, you know, give us a call. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's always the question in science, which, you know, there is never interest on negative results. At least, you know, in natural science, that was also, you know, a struggle. But I think, of course, it's important, especially, you know, I think now there's a lot of talk, and of course we are seeing many of disinformation. And quite a lot of research on it. So I think it's really important, specifically on that topic, to really identify what does not work. You know, and instead, of course, there is a lot of money on that by many companies, but I think we need to be very clear about what does work and what does not work, and really what is the aim of it. Is this information really the cause of the democratic decline that we are having, or is just a symptom of what we are living? So I think that for me are key questions, and understanding, you know, how we treat the symptom or what does not work, I think it's really important. That's, for me, would be an example of how important it would be to understand that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Ilko.
Thanks. I'm Ilko Hartveld from the University of Amsterdam. Yeah, so this discussion on sometimes the mismatch between the sort of information that we're producing that requires a lot of translation to your world or the other way around, made me reflect on the responsibilities we also have as researchers in setting the norms for our own discipline and field, right? As the journal editors or in other capacities. As you said, we are incentivized to always look for that frontier, to look at that three-way interaction that would get you published. But also, I'm, for instance, working on polarization. I notice in discussing this with journalists and with policymakers, just knowing, are we polarized? What are we polarized about? Which then would be called descriptive knowledge, I am super interested in that myself as well, but it's not the sort of thing that journals might be asking for us. That would be a much more micro form of knowledge. So we also have a responsibility to maybe sometimes wonder as academics, what actually do we care about? What sort of information do we want to produce? Is our system of incentives actually also doing that? Should we just start new journals and start doing different things as well? I don't know. Yeah, that's just a thought I had while listening to that, that translation seems to be also ineffective if we always need to do that. Can we do both of these things also as academics? It's not really, sorry, it's one of those classic comments rather than a question.
I think some of the was an attempt, I think it's called, right, the blog. It's an attempt to, so I mean, there is attempts and some of this is successful. I mean, we're here to focus on what doesn't work also, right? So there's a lot that does work. But it's what I said, probably when you're looking at your three-way interaction, you probably also have a frequency table. And that's what I said, you just don't do anything with it. For me, if you, for example, to make it very concrete, send out a survey to all mayors in this country about participation, and your PhDs on what type, whether they're foxes, hedgehogs, yes, I, Berlin, blah, blah, in a three-way interaction, but you probably have a frequency table, how many said, yes, I like participation or not. That's, that's the one where I gives me some sense, are we talking to 2%, 50%, did this change? And so to find a way that that data that you all have in your drawer, because it's the basics for what you build then your, you know, multi-level regression, three-way interaction on. And that's sometimes, and also when we talk to policymakers, the two-pager is very often very, yes, but are more people, and we sometimes have to translate, yes, but controlling ceteris paribus, we can say that, but we need to, so, I mean, I think a lot of that work is there, and there's a lot of efforts being done left, right, Stukrood Vlees, certain blogs, so it's there, podcasts, so we're getting there. I think the big problem is also for us time. So now that I've moved from one field to the other, just reading an academic paper, I don't have time for that. I just don't have time. It's as simple as that. And so reading 5 to make a little bit of a grasp of what's out there is just not, so.
No, but for example, I think that really the medium in this case is important. So the idea is condensing with all the due distinction and explanation that this is maybe a summary that is not entirely complete of your research through means that are tools that are easily accessible by journalists and by all other organizations that can be interested, podcasts, dashboard, but even having a nice individual website for your showcasing your work is crucial, because sometimes I'm searching for expert or research on a topic, and if you have a nice, easily accessible website that people that are not academics can decipher, that's great. You don't have time, of course, to set up a podcast. I understand that, but maybe as a group, yes, or I don't know, but really synthesizing and simplifying your message, attaching, of course, the whole paper or the whole research project to allow those who have time and the instruments to understand the details, yes, but also distilling, let's say, the main information in a way that is easily accessible and consumable quickly, because journalists, policymakers, NGOs do not have time to go in detail. That's important. So I know that some institutions like ULB have some kind of prizes for scientific dissemination and divulgation. I don't know if your university have, but that's something that's important that maybe the vice rector for research can think about, in the sense that it's also a way to help with money, prizes or incentives, the researchers to make their research more accessible. to different actors. Can be NGOs, can be institutions, can be journalists. And I understand that getting cited by the New York Times is not as important of having an article on the American Journal of Political Science, but whatever name is, but it still puts you on the map. And when other people will need your knowledge or knowledge on a given topic that you work on, they will contact you and not someone else, and that will be good for your career, I suppose, in the end.
I would like to press you. Sorry, there's a question from the public.
Are there actually followers online?
I don't know. There are
Yeah.
2 people watching now, but this might be me and Nino.
Those 2 guys in the back.
Yeah, Caterina Freud, Associate Professor in Politics at Sciences Po in Paris. And first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to us. I mean, we are discussing about the role of, like academic research in policy advising, but I have the impression that we are treating all policy sectors as they were the same. But I assume that there are big differences, right, between policy areas. So I would think that there are some policy areas where you get more easily input from researchers and other policy areas where this is difficult or, like harder. I wonder to what extent this is the case. What are the policy areas where related, of course, to challenges to democracy, but not only, where it's easier for you as practitioners to get more input, and why, and what policy areas instead, like are really like in need of academic input? Yeah. But thank you.
So you know that will come out very soon the European Democracy Shield, which follows the Defense of Democracy package. And of course, it is a sensitive topic, as you can imagine, also considering the geopolitical moment that we are living. Aside to that, there is some competence that are of the member states, right? So that's already another issue about the Commission and the member states. And of course, one of the issues, which I think if you have been following the news, is, for instance, the rule of law, which is always a complicated subject, because of course now is also linked with budget, right? And of course we have, specific member states that have some issues regarding the rule of law. This just to say that is a topic that is complicated. And of course, research is important, but there is also a political context that needs to be taken into account, and also the limitations that the Commission in this case has regarding many of the issues. One example, education is under the member states' competence. So the Commission cannot go and provide policies on how education, on civical education, on democratic culture, should take place. So it makes it very complicated and difficult on how the Commission can actually act on the topic of democracy. I think also now is a time where much of the research that you're doing is quite important, because of course I think there is this idea. I'm not a political scientist, so I'm interested on doing specific questions that I know that are important on the policy side, and I have the opportunity to work very closely with researchers that know the literature, they know the research, and I can have a discussion saying, look, we are interested on this. What does the literature is saying about this issue? What is it working and what is not working? So that it's, that's the work that I do, which in a sense is very much of translation. But what I feel since I started this project is that democracy is something that everyone feels very entitled to have an opinion, right? Because everyone feels that, it's part of everyone's life, even if you don't think about it. So you want to be involved or you engage in conversations of democracy or politics. But I think it's very important to really look to the research, what really the evidence is telling you about it. How do citizens see democracy? Do citizens see democracy the same way that political elites see democracy? Do actually citizens consider democracy being a separation of powers? So, you know, this is the type of, I think, questions that research can really help. And I'm jumping to one of the questions, but another one is clearly about youth and the far right. You know, again, that's a question that I think everyone will be interested to understand. You know, is there a really increased support of the youth to the far right? Why is it? Is it grounded in what are the reasons for that support if it's taking place? Is it happening in all member states or more in some member states than other? And why is it in that specific member states? And where is the support taking place? Is the media helping you know, increase that support of the youth? So I think there is a lot at the moment, questions, where you know, the work that you do will be very important. And just to say some of the questions that I think would be important in terms of the, you know, in terms of what I'm seeing, because there is now, of course, a lot of focus and interest by the Commission on the, you know, on the youth because of many issues: housing, unemployment.
The question.
Hi, I think I can talk without the microphone. Okay. Sorry, I'm Shilpi. I work at the Faculty of Law at the VUB. I'm just dabbling in this right now, okay? So I have a very maybe juvenile question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In terms of democracy and innovation and AI, I was wondering, is there any interest in like comparative projects outside of Europe as well? Because I come from India, right? Okay, and 2024 was known as the deepfake election of India. And I was wondering, is there any way to like create a comparative research of those kinds? Is there any interest in that kind of stuff? Because generally we are very focused in the moment within the EU. I'm just asking a question because I thought I can. I was just wondering, just to pick your brains maybe about this.
Well, so I have a good news for you. As you are based at VUB at the moment, I had a look at Horizon Europe work program for Cluster 2 for 2026 and 2027, and there are several calls that focus on AI and democracy. So you just have to wait until February. Okay. And I mean, the work program should be published somewhere, I think, in the fall, but there are several calls, so you can set up a consortium, contact other people. Well, India, I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think it's part of Horizon Europe yet, but South Korea is, for example. There are other countries, Canada now. So you can have a nice comparative project, maybe not based, I mean, you can work on India without Indian partners, but you can have South Korean universities, Canadian universities, and European ones, and submit an application. In that case, get in contact with me. I can be the NGO of the consortium. But there are several calls on that. So, which shows, then we'll see, because this is a draft work program for Horizon Europe Cluster 2 call, so it might change, but it shows clearly that the Commission has an interest in strengthening research on technology and democracy in general. There were a lot of calls in the last two rounds of Horizon Europe, less so in the last round. The deadline was was last week, but I think that because the focus was more shifted to rule of law and all the aspects that are now in the future European Democracy Shield, but I think that technology is still one of the main points on which research has a lot to offer to policymakers. So, for example, I'm just looking at the Horizon Europe Cluster 2 project. There's a lot going on. You might also want to have a look at, sorry, maybe this is stuff you already know, but Digital Europe program, which is specifically, as the name says, targeting collaborative projects in the field of digital. There's Cluster 4 on digital industry and space. So there are many programs at the level of Horizon Europe, which is the main research funding program of the EU. And this is, I'm talking about collaborative research. Then there's the individual research through the European Research Council and so on. But the attention to AI and technology impact on democracy is growing. So you can just have a look at that, where funding is going, and you will see that's important. And more individual level between different universities, I cannot say that, because I mean, depends from one university to the another, but at level of the European Union funding programs, there's a growing interest, so yeah.
On AI and democracy, that's where the money is at the moment, by the way. My program manager is at Yale as we speak. He's landing for a big, I mean, if you do AI and democracy, this is your moment. Sorry all the rest of you, but no, that's really where, I mean, the projects and the money also in North America is on that topic. What I think also coming from academia to what I do now, shifted a bit for me is local does sometimes matter. The obsession to find a comparative and to kind of across elections. And again, we published comparing 33 countries, assuming they were all alike in some stuff, etc. Well, I mean, not totally, but I mean, what I do see in some of the participation work is, for example, and I don't know if it counts for AI and deepfakes, but is there are really differences. And so I've become very humble. So I always say I work in Europe. I know my context, but I will, even though I get demands from other regions, I will be very careful, like, look, this works for us, or, but not sure if it, but even traditions in, let's say, how you do facilitation really differ if you do this in Bosnia or in Scandinavia, or, so there is also a value in just, again, which is very mundane, very local knowledge. And to come back to your thing, half of my job is being a human switchboard. You know, these old ladies who used to be telephone operators? Grow a network then outside of academia in NGOs. You don't have to become a member of the board, but a lot of me contacting academics, like in my field, it's David Farrell, Jane Sudren, etc., who have been in this field, is I will go like, Jane, do you know of a study that looked in the Irish of whether women gained in, or did somebody look at how many participants in citizen assemblies then ran for office? For example, it's very anecdotal. We know from anecdotal evidence that many people who are in citizen assemblies, I think now in Oost-België, one of the citizen assembly members is a member of parliament, ran for election, and now is a sitting MP. But this is anecdotal. And at some point I was like, do we have any data on that? I will reach out because I know these people. So if I get to know you, at some point I might go like, do you know of a study that looked at, you know, and so be in Dutch, vraagbak. And for example, the global network, our ECPR, is called Democracy R&D, of practitioners around the world. And basically the network is the message board. We do a conference once a year. It's this year in Brussels, so 15th of October, if you're interested in deliberative democracy, all practitioners will be in Flagey, 250 from around the world. But our message board is 90% of the time it is, does somebody know somebody who, or do you know, or is there some data on? So if you would work in that field, I would be like, if just once every month you reply to 3 of them, you've helped some people. So very often it's really very mundane, being in networks so people know I can call you for that. And I don't reply to most of I will go like, but I know somebody in Leuven who does a lot on public opinion and elections, and I will go, Ruud, this is a person from Canada doing, well, the Canadian you would know, but etc. And you do this amongst academics, right? You will know a young PhD researcher and go like, I have to talk to André, and you set them up. And so this is the connection we sometimes miss a bit. So.
Okay, another question.
Can
we have now one extra person watching us, so I don't know. Online participation rose by 1/3.
Okay, Luana Russo, Maastricht University. So I wanted to jump on this, right, on this idea of networking. And it's maybe more a question for the Joint Research Center, actually. But it seems to me, Eve, that you rely, and you said we do the same, heavily on your network, right? You have a network, and whenever you need to understand what is going on in the literature, if there is something, you reach out to that network. But that network, it's of course, as it's for all networks, heavily personal, right? It's a network that you personally build. These people know each other, but if tomorrow there is a new director, you change job and they have to find somebody else, that person might not have your network, maybe might have a smaller network, a different network. And what I was wondering, it relates to what I was asking before, is that you, with your organization, because you do this specific thing on deliberative democracy, you said we have a message board, we have this conference, but if the commission is interested in, and it's an if, right? This is really a question, in making this a bit more systematic, why not going beyond, as you said, just having to write a couple of NGO in your Horizon project? Why? I mean, it seems to me we are relying a lot on personal networks. I mean, I also relied on my personal network. I know all of you personally, right? So, and I knew you were researchers, but it seems that there's no systematic way for us to meet. And that maybe would be right to have once a year per theme, something that is organized and you can come. But I wonder if it's because things work well the way they are, we're all happy that we can rely on our personal network, or if if the commission thinks that there's not going to be enough interest, or it's something that at this point nobody wants to invest in. But the first thing that came to my mind is that, of course, I would like to know what NGOs do. I might want, as Elko said, take on my responsibility of having on social impact. But to be honest, it's not like I know any NGO that does what I'm doing in this moment, or I have to rely on my network, and I don't feel I'm very facilitated if I want to reach out.
But this also goes the other way around. So it's hard for us, both as researcher and as practitioner, to understand who's doing what. So I don't know how to develop a dialogue, but the problem is reciprocal, I think.
Yeah. But it's also, it's part of the job.
Yeah.
It's part of the job. I mean, this is why you send even young PhDs in their first year to APSA. You could say it's a waste of public money in a sense that you would think the budget it costs, right, to do that, they probably don't have something so earth-shocking to present at ECPR and etc. But I think 80% of your first conferences is just meeting people, is the drinks and the you know, you will send somebody to EPOP, I think, or to, and that is part of the work. So I actually tell my staff literally, FIDE has to survive if I'm hit by a bus. It's something I literally actually say, which means if you would come work for us, I will send you to a GRC. You have this deliberative, they have a festival on participation and deliberative democracy every year, 2 days. All my staff has been there. Even my intern for communications went last weekend to the citizen panel. So she's a technical staff member. So it's part of the job. We invest in this, of course. So it's something you need to factor in as something really important, is that connection to your field. And for example, our meeting in Flagey, there's people from the GRC in Ispra who come from Italy too, I think, to meet up with, because it's part of their job to know what the field is doing. And so you need to make time and work. So building the networks, we know each other. I know your boss. I know we constantly, because we need to rely. We're all too small to do this. Most of us, except Greenpeace and the really big ones, we have full-time equivalents. Most of us, the NGOs that defend some of your rights of journalism and etc., really work on three 3 guys and girls and 2 interns and etc. Some have big staff, but most NGOs, we really need to rely on networking and calling the other guy to help out and etc. It's not like we have 50 staff so it's work. And so I'm not saying you're not doing, but it's think about, okay, what is the field what network exists, and we will come to you. Actually, for me, the fact that ECPR has an amazing subdivision on deliberative democracy, for us, the fact that I'm not going because the time and etc., but for example, that's a place where if at some point, for example, just speaking about my field, I'm now looking at Anna, I think you're in that group, how we could make a connection that, for example, young NGO people could come to ECPR and just hear the abstracts and what is going on in research. But I cannot come as a non-academic to those conferences. So I would almost say our conferences are more open sometimes than the academic ones, because we don't have an affiliation, so we can't come to your conferences.
And if I can follow up, the personal networks work in every sector. So even for advocacy, the advocacy you do with the networks you build by going to conference at the European Parliament and saying yes to whatever the MEPs of the day are saying, and even if you don't agree, because that's how you build your network. But the point is, there are some instruments that can help you. For example, I know that for an academic right now, it's not super interesting to apply for a Marie Curie doctoral network or staff exchange, but this is how you easily build networks. So I know that it's better to get money for actually doing research, but if you want to build a network, maybe one of the opportunities to use Marie Curie funds for staff exchange. So if you cannot move, you can send one of your PhD or postdocs, or create a doctoral network, and that's the way you create a new network without having to really go into all the conferences in the world. So there are some new funding that are trying to help building networks, and because in Marie Curie, both doctoral network and staff exchange, you need to have either industry representative or NGOs or institutions. So this is also a way to mix up your networks. So there's starting to be funding for this, but of course, you need to know that this exists. For example, I discovered the existence of staff exchange like 2 years ago. I didn't even know that was a Marie Curie opportunity before. And I think the GRC also has some kind of internship secondment.
Students from the Marie Curie, so they can spend some time there working with the team. So
there are instruments, but you need to know that they exist.
As academics, we are working a lot on open access, right? Especially, you mentioned the case of the ECPR, and you said, okay, it takes time to go to the ECPR, but I'm not sure whether, you are asked to pay to go to the ECPR if you are like an NGO or civil society actor, or if you could enter for free. This is something that I don't know. This is not my question. No, but these are, right? There are symbolic and physical barriers. So I guess, and this is something that can be easily addressed, but still, the fact that we don't know much about it, it's already. But my question was not that. I was wondering whether, from your point of view, open access publications, academic publications, make a difference. Or not, because for for academics it's becoming really like one of the central things, like to make our work accessible to other colleagues and papers, books, and but I don't know to what extent this is also relevant for what you do. I don't know, in terms of mapping what exists, spotting some people, or also just reading the abstracts of academic publications, since all of you,
I don't know, my organization
I would like to add to that, by the way, not just open access, because there's another dimension, there's also the broader idea of open science, open data, in the sense that is this something that we're doing amongst each other, thinking that it has an effect on us, or does that carry over?
But very quickly, my organization, for example, is we are having now an intern that's updating our knowledge bases. So we have some kind of internal dashboard where we put all the research on topics we are interested in. And of course, if it's open access, it goes there. If it's not open access, I don't even care because I don't have time to contact the person to ask, please, can you send me your paper? So open access is crucial, but it's not enough because I need to know that the thing exists before accessing it. So it's necessary, but not sufficient. Ha.
The answer is yes, and it's, I think, a democratic duty to publish open access or annoy your, I mean, closed access was, as you know, invented by the print, the editing industry, and it's the most profitable part of the publishing industry by far. There's no musical entertainment tailored. The margins are the highest in any because it's basically an extortion on public money. So yes.
40%, by the way. 40% the profit margin. So if you're looking for a new job, it's a sector that is still growing. I wanted to go back maybe to maybe a little bit more uncomfortable topic. So we've had very constructive talks now about how we can align, right? About like research that is being done but needs to be translated, be more easy, how we can connect to policy cycles. But I'm wondering to which extent, and I go back to the question, like, are we researching the right things? I can imagine that not for all researchers who are researching something, it is worthwhile to do this because we know that maybe the politicians that make the policies are not receptive to certain kinds of solutions, certain kinds of problem areas. I also wonder to which extent this might also be a trap for us to fall in, that we are trying to optimize some part of this solution space so that we can get it to policies, and maybe this will be at the cost of some other spaces that are not as popular, might even be dangerous for NGOs to speak up and be very clear about certain solutions that politicians disagree with. And I'm asking because I was also triggered, I saw there was a meta-analysis in the proceedings of the National Academies of Science on, I think two of you are working for organizations that work on citizen participation, trust among citizens, that looked at interventions in the US, came out in August. And it actually had as a conclusion that either interventions have a very low impact, it doesn't last very long. And so I'm also wondering, like, and what they advise is to look at elite behavior, to look at institutional mechanisms that feed this. And so I think that in this citizen participation thing, it feels safe. We can think about how to optimize that. But what about these other topics, and how do we deal with that, both you and us? Sorry, I told you it was going to be a bit annoying.
First of all, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work. So, for example, a lot of online participation has no effect longer than a week. Most of it doesn't even have any effect. It's as simple as that. So I don't know what that study plunked together under citizen participation. The same, I did a PhD on political socialization. Most of civic education doesn't do anything, right? You might as well not do it. Very often, politicians still like to give classes about how laws are made, even though loads of research shows that 3 weeks later nobody can recall. It's because it's safe. And so to put the uncomfortable ball back is that to some extent, to which extent have you guys become very, very neutral in what you're doing? And trying to not be political and doing objective research on something which, Horkheimer and Adorno would say is always value-laden, and you just have to stand behind it. And we're just stating the facts. To which extent have academics more and more become, we're like natural scientists. We're political scientists. We're no different than people who study temperatures, or we just measure things and we don't take positions. So how easy is it to push over academics because they don't want to make choices and want to remain neutral on what they do? Tom?
I'm glad we have a nice big table here.
Hello.
With people who could get into that.
I'm not speaking for the panel here. Just I'll give it a go.
Well, I mean, Mara, also for the democracy shield, right? The whole idea is like, are we going to see topics emerge that are going to be, how can I say this? How broad will it be? And
I think the democracy shield is like in the secret of the gods. So even inside the commission. I think that's always a challenge for a researcher. It's not only for political science, also for natural science in terms of, what is the most popular topic that I will research because funding will be easier. We used to joke when I was doing my PhD, there is always one protein that is more popular than another. And so, this is the kind of discussion that I think exists in science. But I think that's why scientific integrity is so important, especially of what we are seeing in the States, where academics are being prosecuted for, because of the topics that they are studying and because of the results that they are showing. So I think, again, the independence of research and integrity of scientific research is very important. Sometimes maybe the politicians are not ready to see the research or to see the evidence that is coming out of the research. But it's also the duty of the researcher to push, to not to give in to the pressures. And if the data is solid, if there is a scientific community that backs that research and that results, I think that's what science is about. The science is, the idea of science speaking truth to power. Of course, this is but there is some truth to that in the sense that, science at the moment, or as I think that's the only method that we have to understand the world that we are living. So, sometimes there is inconvenience truth, and we need to live with that. So that's I think the work that research is doing. And of course, even from the side of the commission, like people like me, we also try to push for some topics to be more on the political agenda. Everyone tries to, or at least many of us tries to do the right thing on trying to push some issues in the political agenda. Sometimes it goes, other times it doesn't. And especially the times again that we are living, we don't know what the news are going to be tomorrow, which of course will shift things, because that's how we are at the moment, where things are very easily shift because there is real threats that Europe is facing, so we can shift things, and things may change again because of that. So,
yeah, and just to conclude, because my colleagues have said most of also what I wanted to mention, but as NGOs, for Yves and me, we are also facing threats. So last week, my organization submitted is a SERVE application, so not purely research, but more action-oriented funds application to help develop toolkits for responding to smear campaign against NGOs. And that is something that, so even the existence of NGOs working on specific topics, and I'm not even talking about those that work on climate change, which have been threatened in a very bad way, but even those like yours and mine working on democracy and citizen participation, we are also threatened by specific political elites, but these are elected officials. So for us, it's important to work on, for researchers and ourselves, to work on all the topics, because doing that ensures that we continue to exist, because we are threatened. It's not just talking about inconvenient truth or about topics that are more sensitive. It's just that we are under threat. We are under attack. So we need to find a way to continue to do our work and defend ourselves in the same at the same time. That's
okay. There, Anna has a question.
Thanks. I have a question on that. So, if I understand correctly, your space is shrinking, and if so, how do you notice that? And practically, I mean, I understood you're under attack.
There's no money.
Funding. but it's mainly that, or are there other?
The fact that in Central and Eastern Europe, many NGOs started to panic when NDI and USAID were shut down is an uncomfortable truth for Europeans, that in Europe, many NGOs were funded by American foreign aid. Yes? When George Soros closed Open Society Foundation in Barcelona and Berlin, many NGOs that we work with in Central and Eastern Europe saw 50% of their funding, 10 million for the VUB, and it's in the newspaper. I mean, in the last few years, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, this is a bit the also where we have to, be kind and be policy receptive. And I always say I'm a punk in a boss suit, because we have to be able to talk to politicians, but they're all like, crisis of democracy. But the funding behind it is really limited and very hard and project-wise. And again, it's our little buckets, and the other ones come with flamethrowers. And so it's really a shrinking space. But on top of that, there is, in many member states, more and more legislation that is really made to hurt civil society organizations. For example, in the Hungarian parliament, there is a bill that is ready. It's tabled. It's not yet voted. You know what I'm talking about, which would make the financial responsibility, the liability, on my colleague of Demnet, the Hungarian, but for all CSOs, if they take foreign money, yes, and they find some fault, I'm really bringing it down, you would be personally liable to pay back all Horizon funding as a fine. Yes, it's not yet voted, and of course the Commission has come out very strongly that if you vote this, etc. But imagine you applying for a Horizon project, knowing that there is a bill in the Belgian Parliament by some political parties. It's not yet voted, but you know they have a majority to do. They're kind of throwing it over you, that if you do some research they don't like and they might vote it, suddenly you have to sell your house the next day. Of course, the European Court of Justice will break it very soon, but as we know what happened with judges, for example, in Hungary, when 260 of them were fired, by the time this is, broken in Strasbourg, you've lost your job, your house, you had to, etc. So just those types of, we work with academics in Serbia, for example, who also work on citizen participation. They just get personal threats, even, in their, so the shrinking is really, I'm in a very comfortable position here. I work with amazing people in some countries that really do this at, at the expense of some personal space, the threat of, and so, and this is increasing. And some of the harder truths is that even some center parties, and again, the live stream, I hope you're not recording this, but this is always the problem. If you record lectures, if you're a professor, right, you can't tell the little things. But I'm just going to say, this part of the EPP now has a commission in the European Parliament investigating the funding of CSOs. It's harmless and etc., but just the kind of dynamic that creates is like, it means if you're investigating something, it's a bit suspicious. I was interviewed by German National Radio at some point. We have taken some money from OSF, German radio, and you get the, yes, but you have one funder that is really specific. And I was like, you mean Bertelsmann, conservative right, who we also work with? No, you know who I mean. And I'm now going to be very blunt. I said, you mean the one with the Jewish owner? And for a German radio, he suddenly realized, and they cut it out, of course, but even we have to justify who we get money from. And just saying, for me, it's harmless. I'm in Brussels, I'm safe, I have a good income. But like the people who do this work, and we're not talking about working at on LGBTQ topics and on who get their offices raided, their computers are impounded, they get them back a week later, but all your hard drives have been all that kind of independent radios in Hungary that have to close because they filled out a form wrongly. Look it up, it happened. And of course, each time the commission backfires but it's, I break your window and then I get punished, but your window is broken. And so it's really, sorry to come, but you have to realize there's a lot of young people doing amazing stuff. And then we're not talking Moldavia, Georgia at the moment, Moldavian elections at this moment. I mean, there's people putting really their ass on the line, to be honest. So.
I was last week at.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
talk to these people. And
Yeah. But also ending on a sad note, I was last week at a conference of the Just Transition Platform, and most of the NGOs that work on the ground on decarbonization, regions transition, and helping marginalized community to buy into these kind of transition policies, which is crucial. They depend on life program funding, which is ending. So they literally don't know how to pay their employees next year. They don't know. They will. I don't know if they're gonna close, but they will certainly cut their staff by more than half. So, and I understand. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying it's hard to do this job.
So if you have a research project, you could find some Central and Eastern European NGO, even if it's like on the fringe of, help them, take them in, write a report for them, ignore us. No, seriously, that's some stuff you guys can do. You're in charge of
Yeah. Any questions, reactions to that? Okay, maybe to go back into a more positive atmosphere. I know, I'm sorry. I apologized beforehand. Still, I think it was a valuable contribution. Thank you also for being so open with us. We've been talking about challenges that happen, right, that we're reacting to, the ones that we want to find a solution for. But do you think there is a way for us, broader the research community, whatever constitutes that, and including NGOs, right, to collaborate in a way that we could preempt some of these crises rather than reacting to it? Or is that maybe too hopeful, too big of a challenge?
No, but there's no price for counterfactuals. You know, you never know if you averted a crisis. So we are all working on this, but we can't predict the crisis that we're avoiding. And so I think we have to work with what we know and do our best. And maybe we have avoided stuff already by doing what we do, but I think this is beyond that. I mean, prediction is like the litmus test of your regression model, right? We're always good at predicting the past, but I think we just have to work with the best knowledge we have.
And I think my colleague is in the Foresight team, maybe would have their own thoughts on that. I think it's an important exercise, and that's what we try to do on the Future of Democracy project. On the first phase, it was exactly that. We try to, ask the researchers what they thought, what was the signs and the trends that they were seeing in their discipline that could hint to some of the things that maybe we will see in 5-10 years' time. I think it was, a difficult exercise because, of course, I think it's, of course, not easy to ask researchers what do you think will be the issues that could come out in 5-10 years' time. But I think it was really important because basically they identified 10 challenges. Unfortunately, they are not in 5-10 years. We are already seeing them. Because clearly things are moving very fast. But I think that's a really good exercise at the moment, especially on the topic of democracy, to do. Because a lot of the things, and I remember the researchers saying, but for us, we know this. We have been seeing this for many years now. but the issue is you have been seeing it because, of course, you are working on it and you know the data. But most of the other people don't have that knowledge and that insight to that. So bringing that insight and that issues that you are already identifying and you can see, and also exchanging data with people working in other countries and seeing that the trends are very similar, I think that's really useful, because you can basically say, look, there is a movement already, there is things happening, maybe not kind of, but you can already see some issues that could be worrying. And that, I think that's important, because again, if we really, politicians or policymakers, and you meet them, are listening, they will start understanding, okay, there is things that could come our way, and maybe we will not make them not come our way, but maybe we will be more prepared and we understand why they are coming our way. So I think it's a really important exercise to do.
If I can just follow up on that, I think we were discussing that during the coffee break. I know researchers are mostly attracted by fundamental research because that's what a researcher does, which is perfectly fine, and I know that even for that the space is shrinking. But maybe revolving or paying attention to project-based research is also a way to start working on predicting, or at least trying to not just follow up, but to do some advanced work on potential crises. Because normally project-based research is based on funding calls that are made by policymakers, or research funding linked to policymakers' priorities or interests. And so if you just monitor the calls at national and European level on project-based research, Horizon, and it's the one I know better, but there are many other type of funding, and you see the topic. As a researcher in your field of expertise, I think by just looking at the topics that are in these calls, you know what's coming after. So policymakers are trying to keep up with reality, so those project-based funding is trying to understand what's happening now, but you as a researcher can see what is the following step and how you can start working on the next step that is not yet in the call, maybe will be in the call in 2 years' time, but you will have started already to write something on it or to do some preliminary data collection on that. But you need to monitor. So even you as researcher must not be reactive, but closely monitor what's happening. And one way is looking at where the money goes for research. But then you read the newspapers and you know that the world is burning and there are wars and disinformation and deepfakes, whatever. But even without what you look at in the news, by looking at where the research priorities are in public funding, you can see where the next step can
I just, because of what you were saying, also by being, for instance, the project that we are doing had 2 international calls, so meaning that researchers could apply to this project, to working on the different phases. But because of the interaction among the researchers, that most of them, they didn't know each other, but also the fact that we have periodic meetings, there is a lot of discussion, because then we need to produce a report by the end of the phase of the project. What happens is that, of course, even for the researcher, it comes out interesting questions. So we have many of the researchers that have applied, for instance, to Horizon Europe and other calls, because they basically thought, okay, that's actually interesting. I never thought about that. I know, and maybe even collaborations among. So he also opens, I think, the range of your research questions, because then you realize that, okay, that this could be interesting. I didn't see it from this angle, and actually this person working on this knows this. So even for them, which I'm happy, some of the researchers have now applied for consortiums and even for other funding on questions that they realized that there wasn't a lot of literature because we were asking about it, and they applied to funding. So.
Okay, any questions from the room? No? Okay, so what I've kind of heard in this last bit is that we should look at this whole ecosystem of research funding, not just as a way for research to react or to try to game it by getting funds, but to look at this as an opportunity for agenda setting, because other people in this ecosystem are also influencing this, and this could be a way for researchers to help those who are trying to influence the agenda as well. Yeah? Sound like something to take away from this? Okay, then I would like to thank the panelists for being so open and clear and vivid in their descriptions of problems and solutions, and for their call to action. And I would like to thank all of you also for participating in this round table. And I hope you have a nice continuation of your day. Thanks. Thank you.